It was 6 a.m. on the morning of January 6, 1979. The sound of the alarm clock signaled the start of another long day for Tan Quen Chai and his wife Lee Mei Ying. After rubbing the sleep from their eyes, they sat up in bed and glanced at the calendar on the wall. Without delay, they got dressed, fueled up with a quick breakfast, and headed to the nearby car park where their trusty minibus was parked. The couple were well-known figures in the close-knit community of Block 58, Geylang Bahru, Singapore. For several years, they operated a minibus service that transported students to and from school, making them an essential part of the daily routine for many families in the community. Despite having to rise well before dawn each day, the couple took great care in ensuring that their minibus was clean and ready for the day's journey. The couple were not only responsible for safely transporting other children to school, they too also had 4 children of their own to take care of. Their children ranged from 5 to 10 years old. 3 of their boys were enrolled at Bendemeer Road Primary School, while their youngest, a 5-year-old daughter, attended a nearby PAP kindergarten. The Tan children had grown accustomed to their parents' early morning routine and the familiar sound of their minibus starting up downstairs. And because they didn't need to be up at the crack of dawn for school, they often slept in and woke up later than their parents. However, their mother, Lee Mei Ying, always made it a point to call home at approximately 7:10 a.m. to check in on her children and make sure they were up and ready for their day. It was a routine that the family had established long ago, and it helped to ensure that the children were punctual and prepared for school each day. For Miss Lee, a concerned mother, the routine might have even provided some reassurance that her children were safe. The Tan siblings knew that once the phone rang, it was time to get up and start getting ready for their school day. However, on this particular morning, no one answered. Even after making 3 separate calls, no one picked up the phone. She began to feel worried and uneasy, sensing that something was not right. Desperate to ensure her children were safe, she reached out to one of her neighbors for help. Sensing the urgency in Mrs. Tan's voice, the neighbor immediately agreed to help and went to knock on the door of the Tan's flat. However, no one came to the door. Mrs. Tan got on the phone once more and urged her neighbor to try again. The neighbor's knocks echoed through the house, loud and persistent, but there was still no answer. Mrs. Tan could hear the loud knocking through the phone call. The silence that followed was deafening, and Mrs. Tan began to fear for the worst. But her fears would soon become a reality that would forever change the course of their lives. You're listening to Heinous, an Asian true crime podcast produced by One Up Media. This episode contains scenes of graphic imagery and violence. Listener discretion is advised. It was just before 10 a.m. on the 6th of January 1979. Mr. and Mrs. Tan had just completed the school drop-off and were now racing back home. Mrs. Tan's breathing grew heavier as she spoke to her husband. "I just don't understand. There must be someone at home. I've called so many times. It's just impossible for all 4 of them not to wake up." With his eyes glued to the road, Mr. Tan said, "They must have woken up early and had already left for school. Let's not panic. We'll see when we get home." As the minivan pulled into the parking lot, Mrs. Tan could not wait any longer. She hurriedly opened the vehicle's door and dashed towards the stairs, her heart racing with fear and worry. Her husband quickly followed suit, trying to keep up with her, but she was already several steps ahead. The climb up the stairs felt like an eternity. With every step, Mrs. Tan's anxiety grew stronger. When they finally reached their door, Mrs. Tan's hands were trembling as she fumbled with the keys to unlock the door. As soon as she got it open, she shouted out her children's names. hoping to hear their voices in response. But the house was eerily quiet, nothing except for the sound of her own voice echoing in the empty space. She pushed the bedroom door open with trembling hands, hoping to see her children sleeping safe and sound. However, her heart sank when she found the room empty. As she searched the rest of the house, her panic escalated, and she called out her children's names with increasing desperation. Mr. Tan attempted to console her, but he too was growing anxious. Walking towards the kitchen, they noticed something out of the corner of their eyes. A small opening between the bathroom door allowed a faint beam of light to enter, but what they saw next paralyzed the both of them in fear. It was the ominous glow of red, an intense and vivid crimson hue that could only mean one thing: blood. Pushing the bathroom door open, the couple's eyes widened in horror as they took in the scene before them. The lifeless bodies of all 4 children were piled on top one another, their bodies mutilated and their skin pale and lifeless. Blood was everywhere, coating the towels and splattered on the walls. The pathologist's report revealed that each child had a minimum of 20 slash wounds that ran across their head and limbs. Their only daughter, a 5-year-old, was found with multiple slash marks on her face, while the right arm of their eldest child, a 12-year-old boy, was found nearly severed from his body. In no time at all, the police arrived at the scene and immediately began to investigate. Before we continue with the details of the investigation, it's important to remember that the events took place in the late 70s. The 1970s were a time of significant advances in forensic science, but the field was still in its early stages of development. The tools and techniques that we rely on today, such as DNA analysis, fingerprinting, and ballistics testing, were not yet made available. Instead, investigators usually relied on more traditional methods, such as taking photographs or using chemical tests. However, these methods had their limitations. For example, fingerprinting was a useful tool for identifying suspects, but it was extremely difficult to get a clear print from certain surfaces, and there was always a risk of contamination or smudging. Similarly, blood typing was a valuable method for linking suspects to a crime scene, but it was not foolproof. There was a chance that 2 people could share the same blood type, which meant that blood typing alone could not rule out a suspect completely. As a result, investigators had to rely on their training, intuition, and experience to solve the crime. News of the horrific murders had sparked a wave of public outrage and condemnation. Despite the persistent calls by the police for witnesses to help with the investigation, no one stepped forward. At the time, it was known that the police would only conduct press conferences at the crime scene for cases deemed to be of utmost seriousness and urgency. This protocol had been established to ensure that the media received accurate and timely information while also conveying the gravity of the situation to the public. This crime was no exception, and at the void deck of Block 58 Geylang Bahru, reporters from all over the city descended upon the scene, each trying to find the best spot to get a clear view of the police as they spoke. However, because the victims were all innocent children that had been brutally murdered, the emotionally charged atmosphere at the press conference was palpable, and some journalists were even moved to tears upon hearing the details of the crime. The investigation into the murders was conducted by the Criminal Investigation Department. Although they did not establish a definitive motive behind the killing of the 4 children, they did acknowledge the possibility of the killings being motivated by revenge. And here's why. The police concluded that the murders were premeditated, which means that the killer or killers had planned this for some time and had taken great care to avoid leaving any incriminating evidence behind. During the search of the crime scene, the police found that the area had been meticulously cleaned. Bloodstains were found in the kitchen sink, which suggested that whoever committed the crime had taken the time to clean up after themselves before leaving the flat. Additionally, the two murder weapons, a chopper and a knife, believed to have been taken from the kitchen, were missing from the scene. Since the killings were premeditated and a thorough attempt was made to eliminate the evidence, police also could not dismiss the idea of a robbery. During the 1970s, Singapore was plagued by a high number of violent robberies. These crimes were characterized by brutal and senseless acts of violence, often resulting in the loss of life or severe injury to victims. For instance, in 1971, a group of 10 men brutally murdered a 55-year-old businessman and his two employees to steal 120 gold bars worth $500,000. Similarly, in 1972, on the morning of Singapore's National Day, a 42-year-old wine shop owner was shot and killed by two men who were attempting to rob him. These incidents paint a clear picture of the dangerous and volatile environment that existed during this period. Additionally, these crimes were later proven to be premeditated and well-planned. Considering the severity of the crimes and the frequency at which such violent robberies were taking place, it is reasonable for the police to have presumed that the murder of the 4 children could be a case of robbery. If the motive behind the crime was robbery, it had been executed flawlessly. There was almost no evidence left behind that could be used to identify the culprit. However, as more evidence was uncovered at the scene of the crime, officials began to have reservations about the initial assumption that the motive behind the murders was related to theft or the intention to steal. For example, investigators found no signs of forced entry, suggesting that the killer was either let in by the children or had access to a key to enter the flat. This meant that the killer may have known the family or the children personally, making it easier for them to enter the flat undetected. This indicated that the crime would have been conducted by someone known to the Tan family, such as a relative, family member, or close acquaintance. It seemed highly unlikely that the culprit was a complete stranger. However, as they checked the valuables in the house and consulted with the Tan family, they found no evidence of any missing items or signs of ransacking in the flat. This raised a perplexing question for the investigators. Why would someone walk into the flat, brutally murder 4 innocent children, and take nothing if robbery was their primary objective? Surely something was missing here. The lack of a clear motive only added to the complexity of the investigation, leaving detectives to consider various possibilities as they searched for answers. This led the police to investigate the personal lives of the victims and their family members in more detail, looking for any potential motives or suspects who may have had a grudge against the family. One of the early theories was that the murders could be related to an illegal taunting scheme. A taunting scheme is a kind of investment plan that was relatively popular back in the 70s. The way it works was that a group of people would each put some money into a pot, and the person who lived the longest would get all the money in the end. The idea was that the longer you lived, the more money you would get, and if you died early, your money would go to other people in the group. Sometimes, people would cheat and try to get rid of other members of the group, so they could get more money in the end. Mrs. Tan's brother even spoke to the media about this idea, suggesting that the family had participated in such a scheme and that it could have led to the murders. The police quickly pursued multiple leads in this direction, talking to people who participated in the scheme and collecting proof related to potential financial disagreements. But despite this, the theory did not lead to any conclusive evidence or any leads. A day after the murders, homicide investigators questioned more than 100 neighbors of the Tan family and made public appeals for witnesses to come forward. But this effort proved to be futile. There were a couple of potential leads in the investigation, however, one of which involved residents claiming to have seen the youngest child, 5-year-old Tan Chin Ni, struggling with a man from another block. This lead was the closest the police had to identifying a suspect, but unfortunately, the witness could not be located to provide further information. Furthermore, a 68-year-old neighbor of the Tan family stated that she would usually sit outside the common corridor to watch the children playing, which would have given her a clear view of anyone entering or leaving the family flat. But on the morning of the murders, she was occupied with washing her hair and did not witness anyone entering or leaving the flat. To the police, it was extremely suspicious that no one in the vicinity could have seen or heard anything related to the crime. They were now left with only one confirmation, that this was no ordinary murder, but a meticulously planned act of revenge. Several reports indicated that the perpetrator must have had a close connection to the Tan family, as well as possess detailed knowledge of the Tan's family background and history. Particularly, Mrs. Tan's medical history, because whoever did this was apparently aware that Mrs. Tan had undergone sterilization after the birth of her last child, and perhaps they wanted the Tans to have no hope of ever having a family again. This way, the Tan household would always be empty and devoid of any happiness. Two weeks after the horrific murder, a mysterious Chinese New Year greeting card arrived at the family home. The card portrayed cheerful children playing, which only emphasized the heartbreaking reality that the Tan's own children were taken away from them in a brutal manner. However, it was what was written inside that left the couple speechless. The sender of the card had referred to the Tans by their nicknames, Achai and Eng, and wrote this message inside. Dear Achai and Eng, now you can have no more offspring. Ha ha ha. Signed, the murderer. Not only had the sender of the card addressed the parents by their personal nicknames, it was also signed with the bone-chilling words, the murderer. This fueled major speculation that the anonymous sender had close ties to or intimate knowledge of the family. It also made the task of solving the case even more challenging. As the murder case investigation unfolded, more intriguing clues emerged. Just 8 days after the gruesome crime, a vigilant taxi driver's call to the police changed everything. According to the records, the taxi driver had reported picking up a man in his 20s near the crime scene at approximately 8 a.m. As the car approached the man, the driver couldn't help but notice that the man's left side was smeared with bloodstains. What caught the driver's attention even more was the object that was protruding from the man's waistband, resembling a handle of a knife. Upon reaching his destination, the man exited the taxi, but as he was doing so, the knife had inadvertently struck the door and fallen to the ground, immediately catching the driver's attention. This was the breakthrough the police had been waiting for, the key to solving the case and bringing the perpetrator to justice. All the pieces seemed to fit: bloodstains on his clothes, a knife in his possession, his close proximity to the crime scene, and the timing of his departure. It had to be him. With the potential culprit identified through the taxi driver's report, the authorities were determined to track down the mysterious man. According to the taxi driver, when he inquired about the bloodstains, the young man claimed that it was the aftermath of being beaten up by someone. But this raises the question, was it a coincidence that the young man, who had bloodstains on his shirt and a knife handle protruding from his pants, was found in such close proximity to the crime scene? Well, the short answer is the authorities don't know, but given the circumstances at the time, he became the prime suspect in everyone's minds, and all fingers pointed towards the young man as the possible murderer. Following the taxi driver's report, the police swiftly assembled a team to track down and arrest the mysterious young man. Based on reports, the man was later identified as Uncle, a Malaysian national who happened to be a neighbor of the Tan family. It was revealed that Uncle would frequently visit the Tan family's home to borrow their phone and make calls back to his home country. In the 1970s, owning a telephone was not as common as it is today, and not everyone had easy access to a phone in their homes. This led to a common practice of borrowing phones from neighbors or friends to make calls. In many neighborhoods at the time, It was common for residents to share their phones with each other. It helped build a sense of community, camaraderie, and togetherness. This was particularly helpful for individuals who had limited financial resources or who lived in low-income areas where owning a telephone was a luxury. Moreover, during the 1970s, telephones were typically large and cumbersome wired devices that required connection to a network of telephone lines installed in homes. As a result, in order to borrow a phone from a neighbor, it was necessary to physically enter their house. Given that the young man was a familiar face in the neighborhood, it is likely that the children would have readily agreed to let him in and use their phone. But this sense of community and familiarity that characterized the Geylang Bahru neighborhood may have made the children unaware of the danger that lurked beneath his seemingly benign appearance. However, 2 weeks after his initial arrest, Uncle was eventually released by the police due to a lack of concrete evidence linking him to the crime. The turn of events left many baffled and frustrated, and understandably so, as Uncle had appeared to be the prime suspect in the case at the time. After his release by the authorities, Uncle and his sister moved out of Block 58, but the reasons why aren't particularly clear. Now that the investigation into the mysterious young man had hit a dead end, the police turned their focus to the card that had been sent to the Tan family. The card, with its chilling signature of the murderer, would become a haunting piece of evidence that loomed over the entire investigation. It held the promise of providing crucial clues and insights into the identity of the perpetrator. However, the investigation was impeded by the technological constraints of forensic science during the 1970s. Tracing the sender of the card was nearly impossible. Any potential fingerprints on the card could not be tested or traced due to the lack of advanced forensic technology at the time. Additionally, the fact that it was the Chinese New Year further complicated matters, as sifting through hundreds and thousands of cards to determine where the card was purchased from would be nearly impossible. This unfortunate limitation hindered the investigators' efforts to identify the sender and unravel the mystery behind the killings. As a result, they were back to square one. The card remained a tantalizing piece of evidence that could not be fully utilized in the investigation, which once again left everyone grappling with the question of who could have committed such a horrific act and why. To make matters worse, more and more potential clues began to surface. One neighbor came forward with an account that a suspicious man had mistakenly knocked on a door 5 days before the tragic incident. According to her, the man appeared agitated and in a hurry, but before she could react, he left abruptly without providing any explanation. Despite extensive efforts, the police were unable to identify or locate this mysterious individual, leaving more unanswered questions about his potential connection to the murders and what his intentions might have been. Another neighbor revealed that Li Mei Ying, the mother of the 4 children, had lost her keys approximately a month prior to the incident. But to everyone's surprise, the family did not take the precautionary measure of changing their locks, despite the potential security risk. This revelation raised serious concerns that the killer may have gained entry into the Tan's family home using the lost keys. If the killer had the keys, it would mean that they had unrestricted access to the residence without ever having to leave any signs of forced entry. But once again, despite the efforts to pursue these leads, police were unable to obtain concrete evidence or make significant progress in uncovering the truth. It's difficult to fathom why someone would go to the extreme of killing 4 innocent children, but perhaps an expert's insights may help to shed some light behind the motive. According to Dr. Majid Kadir, the chief psychologist for the Ministry of Home Affairs, there are several possible reasons that may drive individuals to commit such an act. One plausible explanation that he gave is that the children may have witnessed something that the criminal wanted to keep hidden. In an effort to silence potential witnesses, perpetrators may resort to killing children who could have seen something incriminating or could expose any illegal activities. Another possible reason is what is known as mercy killings. Some perpetrators may believe that the world is too harsh or cruel for children to endure, and in a misguided sense of mercy, they may take it upon themselves to end the lives of innocent children. This twisted rationale may be driven by a warped sense of compassion or a distorted belief that they are sparing the children from future suffering. A third motivation, as identified by Dr. Kadir, is what is commonly referred to as murder by proxy. In this scenario, the criminal is trying to get at someone else, and the children become innocent victims in an act of revenge killing. The criminals may intentionally target children as a way to inflict emotional pain or harm on someone else, using the children as pawns in their twisted agenda. Finally, another possible reason for the heinous act of killing children is sexual motivation. In certain cases, criminals with deviant sexual tendencies may specifically target children as victims for their own sexual gratification. The reasons for this could be a perverse drive for dominance and control, combined with deviant and abnormal sexual desires towards young children. In the wake of the cold-blooded killings, the four siblings were laid to rest at Chua Chu Kang Cemetery in a heart-wrenching ceremony. They were dressed in their best clothes, a somber reminder of their young lives cut short. Alongside them, their school bags and cherished toys were placed in their respective burial spots, serving as poignant reminders of the playful innocence that was stolen from them. As the burial proceeded, sources indicate that Lee Mei-ying, the grieving mother, struggled to come to terms with the reality of burying her beloved children. Overcome with unbearable grief and anguish, she fainted multiple times, unable to bear the weight of the devastating loss she had experienced. Even to this day, the identity of the perpetrator behind the heinous murders remains a mystery. For the couple, the lingering questions, the lack of closure, and the injustice of the unresolved case have also exacted a toll on their emotional and mental well-being, leaving them forever haunted by the traumatic events that unfolded in their home. Sources state that the couple abandoned their minibus business and instead sought employment at a plastic manufacturing firm to make ends meet. In December 1983, Lee Mei-ying underwent a reversal of a sterilization and subsequently gave birth to a baby boy. The birth of their son brought a spark of hope amidst the darkness that had engulfed their lives, but it's undeniable that the memories of the unresolved murders continue to cast a long shadow. With advancements in forensic technology and investigative techniques, the approach to solving crimes today has evolved significantly since the 1970s. If the Geylang Bahru murders were to occur today, the police would have employed sophisticated methods such as DNA analysis, fingerprinting, and enhanced surveillance to gather evidence and track down the culprit. The case would likely be handled with modern investigative tools and resources, but the unresolved questions and lingering mystery would still pose a challenge. In April 2021, CLS, or Crime Library Singapore, a charity drive to raise awareness on unresolved cases, conducted a revisit of the Tan family murder case and brought to light new information that had not been previously disclosed. One significant revelation was that the actual scene of the crime was located on level 5 of the building, contrary to the early reports that had indicated it was on level 4. Furthermore, CLS also uncovered that some of the Tan family's neighbors had crucial information that had not been shared with the police during the original investigation. While the exact details of the undisclosed information were not provided, it did add a sense of intrigue to the case, leaving many wondering why these neighbors had not come forward earlier and what other crucial details they may have been withholding. While the newly unearthed information provided by CLS could not be independently verified at the time, it reignited hopes of finally solving the crime that had remained unsolved for over 4 decades. In recent news, a local media outlet was able to locate Miss Lee, who is now in her 70s and residing with her grandson. Upon being informed that the investigation into the case had resumed, Miss Lee fell silent for a considerable period of time, her eyes welling up with tears. While she appeared reluctant to delve further into the past, she nodded in agreement when asked if she held hope for the case to be solved, and she expressed her willingness to leave the matter in the hands of the police. As for Mr. Tan, well, Miss Lee reveals that her husband had passed away before the murders could be solved. While the trauma inflicted upon Miss Lee may remain for the rest of her life, the pursuit of truth and justice for the victims and their loved ones will always be a priority. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Heinous, an Asian true crime podcast brought to you by One Up Media. If you would like to share some feedback or suggest other cases that you would like us to cover, head on down to our website at asiantruecrimepodcast.com. This episode was researched, produced, and written by Yo Gong Jin, with audio engineering by Ethan Sam. We hope to see you again soon in the next episode of Heinous.